Okay, this is a big one. Injury Reserve, by the time I get to Phoenix, is the second studio full-length album from the hip-hop act Injury Reserve. Ah, damn it, man. I nearly wanted to say trio then. I nearly said trio. That's hard. Yeah, I wasn't expecting that. I just stopped myself mid-sentence and I was just like, fuck, that is hard. Wow. I've talked about Injury Reserve since the passing of Grogs. I've reacted to two of their tracks. Knees First, of course, was the first track that they released for the album. And then Superman That, which are both very different sounding songs. But I think talking about the album now, sitting here recording it, feels more real to me than reacting to those tracks for some reason. I think now that you hear it all pieced together, making it all come together and come to life makes it make way more sense than hearing those two tracks individually. And I knew that at the time as well. I knew that it was going to kind of come together and come to life in ways that you wouldn't really be able to figure out by just listening to individual songs. And of course, hearing this album just kind of makes you realize that Grogs just isn't here. I mean, literally barely shows up on the album itself. Occasionally is there. You can hear his voice in some moments. He is credited as a writer on some of these tracks as well. But of course, his absence is truly missed. And when you hear it from front to back, man, it just makes it hard to think that he's just not going to show up. He's not going to be there to drop a verse. And that is just so sad. Like, that is so unbelievably sad, man. Like, especially if you were already a fan of Injury Reserve before this album. He just had a great way of portraying his emotions. He always had a really standout line in most of his verses that just kind of made you go, shit, that's a really tough line to hear. And now that he's not here, not in any of these tracks, just is such a sad thing. And I think they make it aware to the listener that this is a very, very difficult time for Parker and Richie with the music here. Not necessarily always in the lyrics. You don't necessarily pick out things with what they're saying in regards to how they're feeling, but I think they show it with how they design the music here. This music is incredibly dizzying at points. It's incredibly surreal. It sometimes doesn't even make any sense. And I think that's what they want to achieve. They want to achieve that through the music. And my God, they really do that. They strike confusing chords in places that I think just help make you sort of feel what they're feeling without necessarily having to spell it out to you or make everything in what they're saying portray that, because they don't really need to. Superman That, as I've already mentioned, was one of the lead tracks, the lead singles. This track is incredibly dizzying, incredibly confusing, incredibly all over the place. It's chaotic as hell. You hear Richie constantly say, you know, there ain't no saving me, there ain't no saving me or you, over this instrumental that's just completely clouding him. It's taking him over, it's jarring as hell, but it really depicts the mental state of what they're going through. The loss of someone so close to you. I don't think you can really depict it any better than a track like this. Or can you? I mean, maybe you can. They do across many of these tracks, actually. Ground Zero, which is completely alienating and ominous and claustrophobic and just lonely as hell, with the way the instrumental just drones and sounds so bizarre. How off kilter the instrumental is, that just completely messes up with your mind, with the track Footwork in a Forest Fire, with how just weird this one is. They really wanted to get weird this time. I think there was a point somewhere in a post from one of the guys, either Richie or Parker, where, you know, Stepper Groggs said himself that he wants them to get weird. And of course, he wasn't there to really, you know, be a part of that the whole way. But I think they dedicated tracks like this to him, you know? He wanted this, so they gave it him. And that makes it even more special, I think. Just the existence of tracks like this, not necessarily being like a literal homage to, you know, Groggs himself, but the idea, the existence of this weirdness also creates that homage in itself. But in the midst of all this cloudiness, this hazy weirdness, there are some incredibly catchy notes as well. I mean, Superman, that I've mentioned already, but this track is so banging. The way this beat is so wonky and janky, and yet it still maintains its catchiness, is crazy to me. It's crazy. Then you got Smoke Don't Clear, which has such a jiggy hook. I'm like this every time it comes on. Like, But the first time I heard it, I just didn't really pick out anything really to kind of get jiggy to. And then I was like, okay. You've got the really heavy kind of grimy instrumental that comes with SS San Francisco with Z-Loopers, by the way. A really good feature from Z-Loopers. But again, this track is pretty, I mean, yeah, maybe not the most accessible hip-hop track you'll hear, but I would say still, once again, it maintains an accessibility. And you've got Wild Wild West, which I think actually is the one track that feels like it could have come from their earliest stuff. It feels like somewhere between Floss and Self-Titled. I feel like you could get a track like this in the middle of those two albums. It's just got the animated liveliness that you would expect from those releases, and also as well the kind of like chiptune messed up vocals that sometimes you know, they were doing back then. Sometimes that kind of thing can really rub me the wrong way, but I always felt like Injury Reserve actually kind of nailed it whenever they threw it in there. They throw it in there on many tracks on Floss and some tracks on the self-titled album too. And they do it here too, and obviously in the midst of all the chaos within the album, it actually kind of makes sense adding this weirdness as well. They've just got this sharp eye for the experimentation that I feel as though acts like Dialect have had. You've got acts like Slaws and Malone that have been doing stuff like this as well. Clipping for a good while now. Clipping has been doing this. I feel as though these kinds of acts have probably helped Injury Reserve get to where they are with this kind of sound. I mean, there has been a reference in the past from them where they've sort of linked themselves to being the rap Talking Heads. They also called themselves the Rap Weezer, which is a pretty funny line. But I feel like the rap Talking Heads really depicts where they've ended up, because this is an album by artists that have done their homework. They fucking know everything about music, I feel. Like the samples they have incorporated. Black Midi, Black Country New Road, Brian Eno. Like this is a nerd album. Even if you didn't necessarily enjoy the music with this album, because I could totally see why you wouldn't, you kind of have to hand it to them. I mean, I've been saying for a good while Parker Corey is one of the best producers around, and I finally feel vindicated here, because the samples they got, the samples they got for this album. Go back to the last album I reviewed by them. I said Parker was one of the best around then. Don't tell me that I am not a messiah, because Jesus Christ, how did they clear some of these? The way that the sample on Knees just lingers throughout the track and it just works so bloody well. It's crazy. And it's just like a loose Black Midi track as well. It wasn't even a track from one of their albums. It's just one of the loose tracks that they released. And yet they made it work. They made it work like crazy. Holy shit, this is a fantastic track, which I did not understand when I first heard, but the more I heard it, the more I just realized the brilliance, you know? Just the idea of not being able to take anymore and your just knees collapsing. Again, it's not too on the nose, but it's understandable enough so you can totally get what Richie is trying to say here. And then that little whisper of a moment from Groggs as well is pretty heartbreaking to just hear him pop up. You know, it even throws in a pretty, like, you know, humorous line about how he can't grow taller, he's actually growing the other way. Like, Groggs, man. Top picks for you though. I've got to mention this one, man. This is such a great concept for a song. This is a brilliant concept for a song. You know, this is the Chad to, you know, AJR's Netflix trip, which is the Virgin. Like, this is the Chad. This is the Chad. And this track is just so clever with how, you know, the algorithm on things like Netflix, things like Amazon Prime, none of those things are sponsoring this video, so I'm not just name dropping them to get some kind of payment, just in case you were wondering. Not that they'd ever pay me anyway, but the idea that those sites, those apps, whatever you want to call them, just register your interests, your algorithm, I guess, and, you know, show what you want to see. And then the idea of, you know, you scrolling through it, and maybe your best friend or one of your closest friends was using the same Netflix, and you're just scrolling through, seeing all the things that they love to watch, and how even something as small as that can just kind of rip you apart. God, that is brilliant. That is so brilliant. It's such a modern idea for a song, but yet it's not too, you know, in your face with how it's like, you know, about technology these days and shit like that. But it's doing it just well enough to really depict exactly a feeling that you might not have felt yourself, but you could totally understand. It's so fantastic. It really stops me in my tracks each time. I'm just really in awe of how they managed to turn this kind of thing into a song. And then you've got By Storm, which closes out the album with that Brian Eno sample, as well, as I've already mentioned. It sounds amazing. The music here is fantastic. This track really is produced so well. It's just another example of how good they are at closing tracks. I feel like Self-Titled, with the 3-man weave, brilliant closing track that one is. Look Mama, I Did It on Floss, another fantastic closing track. They really know how to end an album. Oh, I dropped my paper, but yeah, just Richie here saying, I see my ankles break down, I don't know how to hold that, and the whole thing he's talking about when it rains, it pours, and it really pours. Again, just really describing the emotions that come with this kind of thing. Also like as well how it sort of is similar to the idea of like your knees falling apart, your knees just not being able to kind of hold you up, which is, you know, something we've heard them reference throughout the album. And the whole thing is just a really great moment in hip-hop music, if you can even call it that in places. I feel like it stretches that label as far as it possibly can, but they do a great job at keeping this a really engaging and interesting album while also just pushing the boundaries as hard and as far as they can. Like, this right here is a really great achievement in music, I feel, because not only is it production wise incredibly impressive, but just the way they just encapsulated all of those emotions within the music. It's a hard thing to get right, and I still feel like I'm still not fully sure about what some of these tracks actually even mean. I mean, yeah, sure, I've talked about it in this review, and I've listened to this album so many times. I did my homework for this review. I made sure I sat down with this album for a long time before I just rushed into a review. But like, there are definitely moments that I still don't fully feel like I get, honestly. And some moments musically that are even a bit too much on the ears, but I just know it's a great listen, you know? I really enjoy the first track, Outside. Still trying to figure that one out though, honestly, like the way it kind of transitions into Superman. That just feel like I'm missing something there, but like I say, maybe if I reviewed this album like in 2 or 3 months time, I'd be able to understand that. But I think this is one of those albums that you kind of just have to let sit with you. You're not going to get it first time, but I don't think you're supposed to, really. And I don't think Richie and Parker get it, actually. I think they're so confused with how they feel that that's just how it's come through in the music, and I think it's just a brilliant way of capturing that. So yeah, I feel like my score might be a bit lower than you're anticipating based on how positive I've been, but you have to remember what I said as well. I'm still sort of digesting some of this in places. Like, some of the musical moments are just so heavy that it's a bit confusing at times. So look, it's a great album. I'm gonna go 8 out of 10, but I know for a fact that one day it could grow higher than an 8. And the streak continues though, like regardless of how different this is to previous albums, it's still a great album. And Jesus Christ, they must have cemented themselves as like the best hip hop group around now. Like, surely. I mean, are there any duos? Are there any groups as good as Injury Reserve? I mean, the streak they're on with Floss, you know, even Live from the Dentist's Office, and their self-titled album, and then this, like, that's a crazy streak. They've got to be the best now, right? Right? But yeah, thank you for watching this review as always. Let me know your thoughts on this review. Tell me if you agree with what I said about them being one of the best duo groups around right now. Thank you for watching as always. Tell me your thoughts on the album in the comments. Have a good day, and goodbye.